Good afternoon, Steve. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me today, John.
Absolutely. It's an absolute pleasure to have you take part in our CTO News Thursday blog episode. Looking forward to learning more about you, Intel, and anything else that you'd like to share with our audience. So in the first instance, please could you further introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm the federal CTO and senior principal engineer for Intel Government Technologies, which is the federal operations for Intel Corporation, where we drive technologies, architectures, and solutions for the public sector, the US government, as well as state, local, and global public sector.
Brilliant. So my first question, Steve, is what did you study at university that which led you to become a chief technology officer?
Well, that's a really interesting question. I actually went to school for research biology. I had a plan back in those days to be an MD, PhD, and do clinical and molecular biology research. And that was the path that I was on because at that time, going back to the late 80s and early 90s, there really wasn't a career to have in computer security and computers in general. I was a hacker as a kid, trying to figure out how computers worked, but that wasn't really a career path that you could have. And so my other love was biology. And so that's the path I went. After graduating and doing a couple of years of graduate research, I had the opportunity to help a company, a person who had gotten some money together and wanted to do this thing called a startup. Didn't really know what he wanted to do, but he knew this internet thing was happening. And so I joined him back in 95 and we did our first startup together. And as they say, the rest is history, doing multiple security startups throughout the 90s and 2000s and ultimately landing at Intel. But what's interesting is you look at the core of what is bioresearch and what the role of a technology CTO is really about having hard challenges or problems and trying to find innovative solutions. And that's really what excited me about both of those fields and continues to excite me today is being presented with hard technical business challenges, trying to enable better, more efficient ways of doing things, how to secure things better, and coming up with non-obvious ways. Sort of if it was easy to do, everyone would be doing it. So how do we solve those hard problems, bringing together technologies from a diverse range? And I think that's really what keeps the role and keeps the industry exciting. It's always changing. So there's always new problems and new technologies that you can bring to bear. And sometimes it's taking old technology concepts and using them in unnatural ways.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'd love to sort of delve more, but I know time's pressing. But great to hear in terms of how you started out within that sort of biology or bio research background to start up. And it's absolutely right in terms of finding the right solutions to the problems using tech. Absolutely. So, how do you foresee the current innovations in government influencing the broader commercial sector in the next 5 to 10 years?
So, John, there's a really interesting correlation there between the public sector and the private sector. A lot of organizations sort of treat them as separate entities. The government has these weird things they need, and the rest of the world does something different. And it's actually not as true as you imagine. What we find is that there's a lot of cross-pollination between the two. One of the really interesting things about government use cases, if you look at the whole of government, from military to civilian use cases, you actually find that the government is almost a macrocosm of everything you'd find in the private sector. You want to talk insurance and healthcare? Well, the Veterans Administration is the world's largest provider of healthcare and insurance for veterans of the military. And they do it at scale at hospitals all over the world and have to deal with the payment systems. So you find that they have the same problems that insurance companies do. They have the same challenges that large hospital systems do, and they have it at scale. So if you can solve it for one, you can solve for the other. And so we find that if you find something that worked in a small hospital system, if you figure out how it can scale, it will work for the VA. And vice versa, things that you apply to the Veterans Administration will absolutely work out in the private sector. We see the same thing in finance when you talk about payment systems. Well, CMS, which is the Medicaid Medicare system, does more payments than almost any bank in the world. IRS collects money and distributes money at scale. You also find even in places that are not as obvious, like defense applications. one of the really powerful areas of defense is how do I get the stuff I need to the place I need it? That's logistics and supply chain. So if figuring out how do I make sure I have the Jeeps, the gas, the oil, the people, where they need to be, when they need to be? How do I have the supply in a local region? How do I deal with weather interruptions? Those are the same questions that large retailers have to deal with shipping companies have to deal with. So what we find is that there's a lot of corollaries. So solving technology problems for one actually helps solve or technology solutions and problems for the other. The way I like to refer to it is that many times we're either federalizing commercial solutions, so taking what worked in commercial and private sector, adding some things to it to make it work for federal, because they'll have higher security requirements, larger scale, or some bespoke needs. And then the flip side is then commercializing federal solutions, finding where you've solved something for one of the government customers and seeing that it actually has a broad applicability to multiple private sector industries. So we see this sort of in tandem innovation where things that are happening on both sides, on the private and public sector, actually cross-pollinate. If you're thinking about how would I, in the case of a federal solution that's specifically solving some mission or enterprise need, how do I commercialize that? How do I build what we're doing for the government, but also keep an eye on how would this help broader industry? And vice versa is keeping an eye on what we're doing, what innovations are happening out in industry, and how it can be applied to government use cases. And so that back and forth is actually a really powerful part of having focus in a large organization or even a small one that's looking at both private and public sector opportunities and use cases.
Amazing, amazing. Do you know, I think, from what you've just shared, it's a case of, as you just said, it's sort of mirroring what could benefit the public sector versus the private sector. So as an example, if you are looking to introduce a new AI tool that enables you to, say, for example, read financial payment systems better or work bought processes, you've seen how you can, whether it be at scale, introduce that into a federal government application or system, or if you're taking a sort of a proof of concept environment from that space, seeing how well that could possibly land in a private sector environment. So it's really, I wouldn't say hedging your bets, but it's really trying to straddle two worlds, trying to see how the technology that's best in use, best in place, able to serve two environments. So yeah, absolutely agreed. And thank you for sharing. Brilliant. So how does translating government requirements into technical roadmaps differ from similar processes in the private sector?
So, John, that is an interesting part of the role in that you almost have to be. It's almost like speaking different languages. Government speaks in a very government-related thing. The acronym soup of terms, different ways of referring to things. And so, oftentimes, what I find I'm doing is from the government requirements back to the technology teams is translating government requirements into technical requirements and mapping those to things they're already doing. And so when you talk about being able to protect against certain kinds of threats from a security perspective, it's translating, well, they need to have this kind of mil grade this and specs to FIPS 140-3, translating that into the technical requirements, which is, well, I need to use this level of algorithm, I need this size of key, and I need it to be able to withstand these kinds of attack scenarios. And so it's really about that translation function of what they need into the technical, and then vice versa, translating technical capabilities and requirements in architecture to the government is mapping it to their mission use case. Now, they have really smart people in the federal government that understand technology, but a lot of the people who are buying and deploying these large-scale systems, they understand how a plane works. They're flying planes, they're delivering goods, and so sometimes what you're doing is helping translate what this technology will do for the mission. They don't really need to know the speeds and feeds and how many bytes and so forth. They need to know, is it going to allow me to get this much more stuff done in this amount of time? Am I going to be able to get a plane repaired quicker? Am I going to be able to get the plane off the deck faster because I'm using an AI tool to do predictive maintenance? So you've got the goods on the field ready for when the plane comes in to do the repair. Like those kinds of things of translating technology innovations into mission, into the requirements that they have. And what you'll find is oftentimes when you get out of the CIO office in private sector and you start talking to line of business, you're doing a lot of the same thing. a line of business owner in a bank cares about, being efficient with their resources, delivering new services to their customers. If you're a credit card, how do I get more credit cards or reduce costs of customer support? The technology is an enabler. And so oftentimes, even in the private sector, you're translating this technology widget, this AI use case, this security thing. What does it do to enable their business case? And it's a lot of the same that we do in the in the public sector, just with a lot more acronyms, a lot more very domain specific terms. But at the end of the day, it's fundamentally translating technology capabilities and requirements into the business or mission needs, requirements, and outcomes. And I think one of the things that successful companies have been adopting for a number of years, and it's really shown, is moving away from, well, my thing makes you faster. Great. What does that mean? It's about the outcome. It's really about being able to translate what the technology does and its benefit, but taking it that next step is, what is the result? And so being outcome-based technology solutions, as opposed to, well, I make you 15% faster. Well, that doesn't really help a business, faster at what? To do what? So you've got to take it that next mile and really show, how does this technology enable the things they care about? I can reduce the cost of customer acquisition. I can reduce the cost of customer support. I can allow you to handle 50 more queries per second, whatever that is. And that queries per second means you can now do more of the business you're trying to do. And so it's really taking it all the way to what really matters, whether that's, effective on the mission to make sure that the Department of Defense is more effective at delivering its capability where it needs it, to healthcare being able to provide more services for more people at a lower cost. At the end of the day, it's about that outcome-based technology innovation. And that's really where the successful organizations are driving their technology innovation, is taking it all the way to show how the outcome. And to that end, what a lot of times you'll see is that in the past, you'd see proof of concepts and demos that sort of, here's my widget and it's running on this system and you can see little flashing lights, to actually demonstrating it used in a real world scenario where they can see, okay, now a doctor can look at the screen and actually see more patient data. So taking it all the way to what matters to ultimately the one who's trying to acquire and the technology who's driving the business.
Absolutely, absolutely well said. And if I can just add just one little piece, is that everything you said is absolutely correct. And I've had some conversations with, one or two other, whether it be technology leaders, CTOs. One of the individuals I've spoken to recently is a lady by the name of Anne Duncan, who is the former CTO for the Department of Energy in the US, the DOE. And she's mentioned in one of our conversations that, one of the fundamental reasons why some applications or products sort of, I wouldn't say fail, but aren't delivering the successes that they should be, is because of, whether it be two things. First of all, at the beginning, the sort of the use case wasn't understood. So, the information gathered for the actual use of the application wasn't really gathered to its full entirety. So, it created some bias there. And also the change management, the culture piece, i.e. the change management. Change management is really about getting everyone on board to understand the value that what they'll be bringing to the table, in delivering the application system, etc., and how that then translates to the outcome. So, absolutely, I think, from the conversations I've heard and shared I've had shared with me, sort of the user experience, whether it be, and also the change management piece, are absolutely fundamental to the success of the outcomes that should be delivered. Brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Okay, please can you elaborate on some bespoke solutions developed for government that would be impractical or unnecessary for banks and retailers?
So, John, just to go on that, you'll find that there are a lot of times people that is a preconceived notion that, well, if I'm building it for the government, it's only going to work for the government. And oftentimes it's not the actual technology you're building, but sometimes it's the technology used to do it. So yes, most private sector organizations aren't building fighter jets or deploying battleships into the field. They're not doing tax collection or other parts of the government services across the broad range of services and capabilities that the federal government provides. But when you peel back the onion a little bit and look at what goes into those applications, even the ones that don't seem like they're completely applicable, there's a lot of really powerful technology and solutions that actually apply to the private sector. So I'll pick on one example. We talk about building a fighter jet, for the next generation fighter jets, or maintaining the existing fleet. That would seem to be something that is bespoke for a government agency, for the Department of Defense, and wouldn't have any applicability to anyone else. But then when you look underneath that, so what does it take to do that? There are a variety of technology innovations that go into building a jet, building a fighter jet. And it's not just, the aerospace industry. Things like digital twins, being able to do simulations for error detection or flow dynamics, being able to do sort of supply chain management in order to be able to make sure you have all the pieces necessary. When you start looking at it from those sort of building block technology suites, and then you go look at manufacturing, a John Deere or a Caterpillar are building tractors. Digital twins are absolutely critical to how they're building those things and keeping up the efficiencies. Fault detection and being able to do measurements and simulations to understand, will it be able to handle the mud versus in the case of an airplane, can it handle the G-force? The same kind of technology suites actually apply to both sides. And so what you often find is, while at first glance, many of the things that the government is doing does look very government specific, the building blocks for those technologies are often very applicable across multiple private sector industries. Like I said, supply chain logistics management, digital twin technologies, and then you start looking at things like AI and AI uses. Things like intelligence gathering and being able to do monitoring, surveillance, reconnaissance, those kind of things. They sound very government specific, but you also look at law enforcement. State and local law enforcement also needs to do surveillance, reconnaissance, intelligence. You look at the same building blocks when you're trying to figure out, how do I do better customer relationship management? I need to understand my customer and understand their behaviors and understand what's their, in the case if you're a retail organization, what's their buying strategy? What are the things that are impacting their decision making? That's the same kinds of questions that you're asking, about, am I tracking a spy? Am I tracking a rogue nation? What are their behaviors? What are the things that are impacting their decision making? A lot of the same questions, which means a lot of the same foundational technology can be applied to both use cases, very different outcomes. But ultimately, the infrastructure, the flows, and the technology that's brought to bear is often very common between public and private sector. So I would actually challenge that question and say that for the vast majority of things, there aren't really completely bespoke government-only solutions, but there are government-unique outcomes. But the building blocks that got you there are very much common across which is why you see a lot of the technology industry, Silicon Valley and the large technology companies and startups do have a public sector or federal division, because the commercial technologies, commercial solutions work for government, and vice versa. You'll find that many of the defense industrial base actually have commercial arms as well, because the reuse across those domains is actually very powerful and scalable.
Absolutely, 100% agreed. Do you know, as you were speaking, I was thinking of analogies that I could possibly use to summarize what you've just shared. And an analogy that I'd just like to share is, I can imagine that being a building that could be a government building, a resident building, a police building. It still requires the same monitoring, but the outcome is different. I.e., the information gathered from the data will be interpreted differently and actioned differently. Or, as an example, if you had water, a bottle of water, the same water that anyone drinks could be in a corner shop, could be in a supermarket, could be at an airport, could be in the Sahara Desert, but it all has different values in terms of price. So it all depends, what is that particular use case that you're trying to get and the outcome that comes from that. Brilliant.
Exactly.
Exactly. Okay. So what strategies can be implemented to address skill shortage in critical areas like AI, cybersecurity, and technical expertise that you've seen?
So that is, one of the big questions, honestly, for the past several administrations. Every administration that has come through, every division, every time a new, CIO or CTO comes into an agency, that is one of the top three is the workforce. And whether it be cyber talent, AI talent, or just technology modernization, how do they get the workforce? And so a lot of strategies have focused on, getting the right STEM curricula into the early education, so people come out of college with a strong foundation in these technologies.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think has been really innovative and is something that is starting to scale, but it hasn't scaled yet, is the sharing of people and resources. So being able to do sort of fellowships in government from technology, and then vice versa, having folks from government spend time working at technology companies. And so having that cross pollination where we're sharing resources, where you spend a year of your career, you're in Silicon Valley, you spend a year working at at a department in the U.S. government, and vice versa. You have an acquisitions person, maybe spend time at a technology company, understand how they do acquisition. One of the things that does is it cross trains. And so people in government can see what some of the best practices and things that are being done in technology companies and businesses and learn from that. And vice versa, you have people in the private sector getting a better understanding of government. And what that does is it exposes both sides to some of the leading edge technologies. And then when they come back to their organization, they become the change agent. It's the train the trainer. And why that is important is because we're not going to be able to send our entire workforce back to school to go, you're going to be an AI guru now. But if we can start creating these pockets of excellence within both sides of the organizations, understanding the scale requirements of government, understanding the innovations and the latest and greatest technologies, that is one key thing that I've seen really help, especially in the federal workforce, them get exposed to and working knowledge of some of the advanced technologies and solutions that are being brought, AI, getting training in, on cybersecurity. And again, the other thing is the within organization, the movement, the lateral movement, moving people around to get different level areas of expertise. And so, I'll give an example. If you're at the Department of Defense, maybe you're at the pointy edge of the spear and you're using all the cool AI to do intelligence gathering. Great, you've been trained on it. What about the acquisitions and procurement folks? They need to know how to use this technology to be able to get better efficiencies. And so rotation within organizations so that people within those organizations get exposed to how to use these technologies. Because the reality is we don't need the entire federal workforce to be able to code the next OpenAI or Llama. What we need is for the federal workforce to be proficient in the use of these technologies and the application to things that don't you currently use them today. And that's about exposure and about seeing them operate in a real world scenario. And so there's lots of opportunities, and the Department of Defense is really good about this, about moving people around throughout their career to get exposed to different parts of the organization. I think other civilian agencies are not as nimble in that respect, and something that they should be looking at. And I think we see in certain private sector organizations the same kind of idea, although a lot of times people get very much sort of pigeonholed into, well, you're the cyber analyst, you're going to always be a cyber analyst. It'd be good for that cyber analyst to spend some time with the data scientists and vice versa. And so that rotation within organization and across organization is actually a powerful tool to help augment our talent shortage. I think the other is that as we've seen from multiple executive orders over the last 10 years, is investing in the next generations of talent to help them be ready to hit the ground running with the use of the technologies that are appropriate. AI is the buzzword. So everyone's learning AI, and that's great. The cyber workforce is still something that we need to continue to beef up. And I think that in the case of cybersecurity, that is one that continues to need investment because the problem just keeps going, logarithmically higher. Yeah. And the issues and challenges are outpacing the workforces we have. One of the interesting things is when you start to take technologies from multiple domains. AI is transformative for so many things. There are really powerful places where it's going to transform cybersecurity. And it's not always the most obvious. It's not going to catch the next weird malware that no one has ever seen before, because that's not really a good use of AI. But if it can make your team, more efficient at dealing with the everyday mundane so they can focus on the really hard problems, now you can take your limited workforce and make them much more efficient and much more powerful because they're focusing on the 10% hard problem of something that no one's ever seen before. AI is really good at something you've seen a million times. You can train it on that and let it deal with the day-to-day firefighting of, yet another ransomware attack. And so there are opportunities to take technologies from multiple domains to make the domains that are struggling more efficient to deal with some of the cyber talent in the case of cyber. I think the last thing I would put out there is that people often focus on the core STEM technologies. You need more programmers. We need more deep understanding of reverse engineering or AI data science. And while that is true, we need more of those people. The bigger problem is in the applied space. How do I leverage these technologies into the business applications? And that is often doesn't require the same level of, going back to school for 4 years to become a data scientist. It's, do you have the tools at your disposal and the solutions to be able to use these technologies and apply it to problems that you are the domain expert on? You take procurement or even healthcare. The doctor is the expert in diagnosing a certain thing, helping the doctor take advantage of those technologies to apply them to their domain, use their expertise, not retrain them to be something they're not. And that is one of the ways where it's actually a much more efficient way of enabling our workforce, our talent, is giving them the tools they need to do the job that they're really good at, as opposed to trying to turn people into something they're not. And I think what we'll see as the efficiencies across time is, like I said, I don't need data scientists by the billions. What I need is data science enabled doctors, data science enabled warfighter. Give them the tools, train them on how to use the tools. Let the technology teams build the tools, but what I need is people who know how to use the tools and when to use the tools. And that is something that would get a faster turnaround on getting our talent and our workforce ready for these technologies.
Fantastic, Steve. So how do you balance the contributions of in-house teams and external contractors to ensure seamless collaboration and optimal outcomes?
So, John, that's a really interesting question, especially when you look at the kind of programs and the kind of talent you need. I want to sort of lay the groundwork here that sort of you have your internal teams, and these are your experts and your engineers and your architects that you have that you use across multiple different projects and programs. And the two reasons that you go to external, that I, at least in my world, is one, let's call it the standard sort of staff augmentation. I need to scale out certain capabilities. I need more software engineers with Python experience, or I need more firmware developers. I need more system engineers to help configure systems. So it's really taking a small capability that you have and scaling it out with staff augmentation with contractors. The other is where you need specific expertise that you don't have in-house that doesn't necessarily translate across many programs, but this one project needs a specialist in this area. And does it make sense to hire that person onto your team if you really don't have the work or the level of effort to keep them engaged on that specific area? So in those two different scenarios, they're managed slightly differently. When we look at staff augmentation, it's really about again, scaling out your teams and having your team be able to multiply the numbers for the needs of a particular project or program. You still use a lot of the all the normal program management, project management tools, techniques, and processes. And one of the things that I find is making sure that you line up your teams, the specialists you have in that domain, become sort of the front end to the staff, the staff augmented contractors, for two reasons. One, they can give those folks that are external to your organization the insights and the help to help navigate working inside an organization they're not used to because they're just coming in. But also this way, that person that's on your team can maintain that institutional knowledge, understand what decisions were made in their specific area of software engineering, quality assurance, what have you, so that when the next project comes along and we again scan up a team, they can bring the learnings from last time along for the next group, so we're not starting from scratch. And so part of it is marrying the key people in your team, giving them the opportunity to be in some respects a leader or a team lead for the folks that you're bringing in externally. And that really, it does multiple things. It allows you to, like I said, maintain that institutional knowledge programmed in project to project, but also gives the opportunity for engineers on your team to get leadership skills, to get the training, to get the exposure and the tools and processes so that they can grow in their careers and move up as they get the opportunity to manage teams that come in and come out for various different projects. On the other side, when we're bringing in experts that have a specific, unique set of skills, whether it's someone who understands how to do certain things with hardware, or people who've got specific areas of expertise in AI that we may not have that we want to bring in for a particular set of program requirements. And oftentimes in the public sector, it may be more use case driven. You need an expert in this domain to help augment your team that's sort of cross domain. The PIC healthcare, you want to have someone who's built solutions for doctors who understands that, the nuance of what are the requirements that aren't obvious. Give you an example of something that was done a number of years ago. When you're building a tablet for the doctor to use in their environment, you can have the best tablet people. We built tablets back in the day. We had the best form factors. They were lightweight. They had all these things. but were they thinking about the kinds of safety requirements that you have in a hospital? Not just about, making sure that it doesn't have sharp edges, but also being able to be easy to be cleaned because you need to be able to sanitize it as you move room to room, something that's going to be made of materials that don't corrode, something that can easily be, if you're in a sterile environment, it can be easily wrapped up but still have a touchscreen. Those little nuances that are non-obvious, and doctors won't tell you that, you'd have to talk to a safety engineer, bringing experts in for the program was a really powerful thing to get those non-obvious requirements built into the platform. The way you manage those is you make sure that they're paired up with the folks that are your experts in that domain, and they're working in tandem. So this way you leverage that information that you're getting, and that can influence directly the platform. If you have them off to the side saying, hey, you need to have special materials, and it doesn't get to the teams, then you're going to have a broken process, and you're going to end up with having to go back and retrofit and fix. So it's about getting those experts in early in the design cycle. And that's one of the things that I found is that, staff augment, where you're just sort of scaling our team, typically come in later after you've sort of designed the solution, you built the plan. Okay, now I got to go run and make it happen, and I need 50 more people to do it. You go that route. When you're dealing with the domain experts or this very specific skill set, it's oftentimes best to bring them in earlier in the development cycle into the design and requirements definition, because they're going to bring that level of expertise and allow you to make a better design, a more efficient outcome, because they're going to inject their expertise earlier in the development lifecycle, or tell you, you know what, that's crazy, that will never work, and then we can go a different path. You don't want to hear that late in the stage. And so part of it is about understanding how to manage the talent based on why you're bringing in those external contractors. And the other is making sure that your team and those external teams are working hand in hand. It should never be adversarial. It should be collaborative, and making sure that your team feels empowered to work with the external talent. It's never about, well, I'm going to replace my internal team with external. We're not outsourcing. We're scaling. We're basically, how do we get the best and the brightest working with the best and the brightest? And from a corporate perspective, one of the nice things is, as you work with these external entities and your program, amount of programs and projects grow, those become targets for, well, I need to grow my team. Who am I going to grow? I'm going to grow people I've worked with before that do good work. And many of these staff augment and specialists have mechanisms to be able to pull those folks in-house full time. And so it's almost like a try before you buy kind of thing, where you're working with organizations, learning how people work and getting them exposed to your environment. And as you are becoming more successful and you're taking on more work, you have a pre sort of vetted set of resources that you can go tap into. And that actually helps you be more nimble, and can reduce the time of when you get a new project. Now I've got to go hire 50 people because I've got 12 projects just like this. Staff augment is good for the first one, but then for the second and onto the 50th, you already have a pre-vetted set of teams that you can either decide to hire or just keep reusing. And that relationship, really helps enable, a more nimble and efficient outcome, as well as, better time to market for the projects.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Agreed. Amazing. Okay. So how do you practically implement the principle of surrounding yourself with people smarter than you on a day-to-day leadership?
So John, I love that quote because I learned that one early in my career. I had the fortunate opportunity to meet with Jim Collins, who wrote the book Good to Great, and several other really powerful books. And I had an opportunity to spend some time with him. And that was one of the things that I really walked away from that experience. There were several things he talked about, get the right people on the bus, which really at the end of the day is surround yourself with people smarter than you and listen to them. And the way you do that is no one can be an expert in everything, and you don't want to be an expert in everything. What I find is that you surround yourself with the domain experts in the fields that ultimately, collectively gives you the best chance for success. You need to have your AI experts, you need to have your cyber experts, and you let them be the deep technical domain experts in their area. And the key is to let them be, the term we use in the industry all the time is called the bell cow. They're going to hear about things, they're going to see things in their domain. They may not know what the ultimate implication of it is, but they're going to tell you about it earlier. And I find that, there's been multiple examples. I'll give you one. I have a couple of folks, I have one on my direct team and one that's sort of matrixed into me, that are gurus in AI. One is an expert in AI performance and in optimization and enhancement. And another one is more on the research side on advanced training and AI model development, and AI algorithms. And both of them, within a couple weeks of each other, came to me and said, "Hey, there's this new thing happening I want to tell you about." I'm like, "Oh, cool. So talk to me." And they were talking about this transformation generative AI capability. This is long before anyone knew what OpenAI was or any of these other things. This was 6 months before OpenAI came out with ChatGPT. And both of them came and said, "Hey, there's this new area of research that's really interesting, and here's what you can do." And they would walk me through the architecture, what it meant. And so I had an understanding. I had these two folks telling me about Gen AI before anyone was talking Gen AI. And so now, as we were starting to think about, okay, what is our next inflection point to be focused on, we were already ready. Because then when Gen AI happened, when ChatGPT, we weren't caught, oh my gosh, we got to go learn. We had experts telling us